This happened in 2015. A few friends and I had rented a cabin deep in the woods to celebrate New Year's Eve. It was supposed to be the perfect getaway. No noise from the city, just nature and a cozy fire. The night started off great. We were laughing, playing games, and drinking around the fireplace. But as the hours ticked closer to midnight, something changed. It was subtle at first. The fire crackled louder than usual, and the wind outside seemed to howl in strange rhythms, almost like it was calling out to us. At around 10:30 p.m., I volunteered to go outside to grab more firewood. The air was biting cold, the kind that stings your lungs when you breathe. As I crouched by the woodpile, I suddenly had this overwhelming feeling of being watched. I turned, and that's when I saw him. A man standing just beyond the tree line. He was tall, wearing a long black coat and a hat that hid most of his face. He didn't move. He didn't make a sound. He just stood there watching me. I froze. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe he was a hiker or someone from another cabin. But there was something off about him. He didn't look lost or cold. He just looked wrong. I mustered up some courage and called out, "Hey, do you need help?" My voice sounded shaky, even to me. He didn't respond. He tilted his head slightly, almost like he was amused by my fear. I grabbed the firewood and ran back inside, locking the door behind me. My friends laughed it off when I told them, saying it was probably just a neighbor playing a prank. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. As midnight approached, the air in the cabin grew heavier, like the walls were closing in. Just as we were about to count down, there was a loud, deliberate knock at the door. 3 slow, heavy knocks. Everyone froze. I'll never forget the look on my friend Sarah's face, pure terror. We opened the door, but no one was there. The snow outside was untouched, pristine. Then we heard it. Footsteps on the roof. Heavy, deliberate steps, pacing back and forth. We sat huddled in silence for what felt like hours, too scared to move. The footsteps stopped just before dawn. We left the cabin as soon as the sun came up, and none of us ever went back. It was New Year's Eve 2020. I had spent the evening at my parents' house and was driving home late at night. The highway was practically deserted, with only the occasional car passing by. Rain drizzled lightly, and a thick fog had settled in, swallowing up the road ahead. That's when I saw her. A woman standing on the side of the road wearing a long white dress. Her hair was soaking wet, plastered to her face, and she was waving her arms frantically as if begging for help. My first instinct was to keep driving, but something about her stopped me. Maybe it was the way her movement seemed so desperate, or maybe it was just curiosity. I pulled over, rolling down my window slightly. "Do you need help?" I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed down the road, her hand trembling. Her face, I can't even explain it. She looked terrified, but there was something else too. Something hollow, like she wasn't really there. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door and let her in. She slid into the back seat without a word. Her dress left damp spots on the upholstery, but I was too focused on the fear building in my chest. After a few minutes of silence, she finally spoke. Her voice was so soft I almost didn't hear it. "Don't stop for him," she said. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, but her face was turned toward the window. "Who are you talking about?" I asked. She didn't answer. A few miles later, I saw him. A man standing in the middle of the road. His clothes were tattered and his head was tilted at an unnatural angle. I slowed down, trying to decide what to do. That's when she screamed, "Keep driving!" Her voice was sharp, filled with urgency. I swerved around him, nearly losing control of the car. When I looked in the rearview mirror, the man was gone. So was she. The back seat was completely empty. I pulled over, my hands shaking, and tried to catch my breath. The next day I checked my ride history, but there was no record of the trip. Later I learned that stretch of highway had been the site of numerous accidents. Witnesses often reported seeing a woman in white before their crashes. I still don't know what I saw that night, but I know I'll never drive that road alone again. A few years ago, I decided to celebrate New Year's Eve in style by staying at a historic hotel downtown. It had this old-world charm, ornate chandeliers, red velvet carpets, and a history that stretched back over a century. But with that history came rumors. Guests often spoke of strange occurrences, flickering lights, doors that opened on their own, and the sound of footsteps in empty hallways. I didn't pay much attention, at least not at first. The celebrations in the ballroom were lively, and midnight came with cheers and champagne. I was on my way back to my room around 1 a.m. when I noticed the hallway felt different. The air was colder, heavier, and there was a faint, musty smell that hadn't been there before. As I unlocked my door, I heard footsteps behind me. Turning quickly, I saw no one. Shrugging it off, I entered my room. That's when the trouble began. At around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of faint whispering. It was low, almost like a murmur, coming from the direction of the bathroom. Groggy, but curious, I got up to check. The bathroom was empty, but the whispering continued. It was as if the walls themselves were speaking. I turned off the bathroom light and crawled back into bed, determined to ignore it. But just as I was drifting off, the wardrobe door creaked open on its own. My heart raced as I stared at the dark gap. Slowly, I got up and approached it. Inside, I found a small, dusty music box. I hadn't seen it earlier, and it certainly wasn't mine. I hesitated but opened it. The haunting melody filled the room, and as it played, I felt the temperature drop. The mirror above the dresser fogged up, and slowly, words began to form. Get out. I grabbed my things and bolted out of that room, not even waiting for the elevator. The hotel staff acted like they'd heard it all before, apologizing and offering to move me to another room. I didn't stay. I couldn't. I still don't know how that music box got there, but every time I hear a faint melody, it sends chills down my spine. It was New Year's Eve, and I was at a rooftop party in the heart of the city. The view was breathtaking. Skyscrapers lit up against the night sky, and fireworks were already starting in the distance. There were about 20 of us, chatting, laughing, and enjoying the night. At some point, I stepped away from the group to get some air. That's when I saw him, a man standing on the balcony of the building across from us. He wasn't watching the fireworks or celebrating. He was just standing there, staring directly at me. I thought it was strange, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just a neighbor curious about our party. But as the night went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me specifically. When midnight came, the party erupted in cheers. I glanced back at the balcony and he was gone. Relieved, I went back to enjoying the night. But just as I was about to leave, someone screamed. We all rushed to the edge of our rooftop and looked down. A man was lying on the ground below, twisted in an unnatural way. At first, I thought it was him, the man from the balcony. But when the paramedics arrived, they said something I'll never forget. "There's no way he could have fallen from up there," one of them said. "There's no access to the roof from this building. It's been sealed off for years." I still see his face sometimes when I close my eyes in the reflections of windows, always staring. This is the hardest story for me to tell because I still don't fully understand what happened. It was New Year's Eve, 2018. I had decided to spend the evening with my family at my parents' house. A quiet, uneventful night in a small suburban neighborhood. Or so I thought. The evening started like any other. My mom had cooked a big dinner, my siblings and I were joking around, and we were all watching a countdown show on TV. Around 11:50 p.m., I felt the urge to step outside for some fresh air. It was a still, cold night, the kind where the air feels sharper and the world seems quieter than usual. I stood on the porch looking up at the stars when I felt it. A sudden, dizzying shift. It was as if the ground tilted beneath me. My vision blurred for a moment, and I felt a strange pressure in my ears, like when a plane descends too quickly. When it passed, I found myself sitting back at the dinner table, my family chatting and laughing as if nothing had happened. I glanced at the clock. It read 11:30 p.m. My heart started pounding. I knew it had been nearly midnight just moments ago, but here I was, back at 11:30. At first, I thought maybe I'd fallen asleep for a few seconds and imagined stepping outside. I shook it off and went about the evening, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But when 11:50 p.m. came again, I felt the same urge to go outside. It wasn't a decision, I almost felt compelled, like something was pulling me. I stepped onto the porch and the same disorienting sensation washed over me. The dizziness, the blurred vision, the strange pressure in my ears. When I opened my eyes, I was back at the table. And the clock? 11:30 p.m. By now, I was starting to panic. I tried to tell my family what was happening, but they just laughed, thinking I was playing some kind of joke. My mom even joked that I should stop drinking so much cider. Their laughter felt wrong, though. Forced. Hollow. Almost as if they were mimicking human reactions, but they weren't quite right. The third time it happened, I stayed inside. Midnight approached again, and I fought every instinct to step outside. I clung to the arm of my chair, my knuckles white. But the dizziness came anyway. I didn't even have to move. It felt like the room itself tilted, pulling me back to that same moment. 11:30 p.m. This time, I started experimenting. I walked into different rooms. I even left the house and got in my car, driving as far as I could. But no matter what I did, I always ended up back at the table. My family always laughed at the same joke. The same song always played faintly from the TV. The clock always read 11:30. The loop felt endless, like I was trapped in some cosmic joke. By the fifth or sixth loop, I stopped trying to explain it to anyone. I started noticing other strange details. The ticking of the clock seemed louder with each reset. Shadows in the corners of the room grew darker, deeper, as if they were watching me. And my family's movements, they became robotic. Their gestures repeated exactly the same way, over and over. By the 10th loop, I was desperate. I tried to break the clock, thinking maybe it was the source of this madness. But as soon as I touched it, the room spun violently, and I was thrown back into my chair. The clock was whole again, ticking steadily at 11:30. Finally, I decided to do nothing. Midnight came and went, and for the first time, the loop didn't reset. But the relief was short-lived. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Something was off. The clock now read 12:01, but the house felt different, colder, emptier. My family was gone. Their chairs were empty, and the laughter was replaced by a deafening silence. I tried calling out for them, but my voice seemed to disappear into the void. That's when I heard it, a faint knock on the front door. It wasn't frantic or loud, just a slow, deliberate knock, as if whoever, or whatever, was outside knew I was alone. I didn't open the door. I couldn't. Instead, I sat there until the sun came up, too scared to move. When dawn broke, the house returned to normal, my family back as if nothing had happened. They had no memory of the night, no recollection of the loops. But I knew. I could feel it. Something had seen me that night, something I had accidentally disturbed.